Welcome to the World Movers Podcast. I'm your host, DJ Angelfire, with my co-host Noah, aka the 51st Citizen. He's got a new album out. What's the name of the album?
That's right. It's called Birth Music. So if you're planning on being born soon, you should probably listen to it.
Yeah, or if you'd like to be born again, listen to Birth Music by 51st Citizen. With that said, I'm going to bring in our main guest and friend of the show. He's been really encouraging to me in this whole podcast. Jono Mi Lo, would you like to kind of talk about really your past? Because I know you've been very connected with the experimental music scene for many years. And, just kind of give us an intro, I guess.
Sure, no problem. First off, thank you guys for having me on the show. This is really awesome. I really appreciate it because there was a lot of cross wires to try to get me onto this show. So I just want to say first and foremost, I appreciate the patience and everything. But yeah, I've been making experimental music now for, oh my God, this will be like 11 years, 12 years. I grew up in the Midwest, so there was a lot of that whole sort of like peripheral lo-fi's, noise, industrial scene that I kind of got influenced by to make my music. And then around 2010-ish, 2011, I switched from making that sort of style of industrial noise type music, like DIY, to electronic music. From then till now, it's been like this shift into more digital, I guess you could say, the music styles. But now I spend most of my time trying to work, I guess you could say, in like sort of, I guess, online activist role. I do a bit of journalism. Yeah, I do a bit of photography, and I run this Facebook group that you know of, Dawn of the New Ugly. Yeah, I've been the admin for like, oh my God, like a few years now. Like 4 years or something like that. It's pretty maddening, yeah.
So I guess I should explain how I kind of found you. Basically, my buddy Steve, shout out to Sacral Thrash. He was the one that turned me on to Dawn of the New Ugly. I'm curious, when did that whole group and how did that idea come about for you?
Oh man, that's funny because I just did a reading, me and my girlfriend, because I hadn't rehashed it in a while. I wrote a short story called, entitled Dawn of the New Ugly. And this was in 2014. And I had gotten really interested in like the mythology, you can say, around conspiracy theories and like how they work and how that kind of right-wing media kind of parades itself. And I guess you could say I kind of did like a Burroughs style, like kind of like cut up, where I went through all these forums and Twitter posts and Reddit posts and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, what do these people believe is going to like bring about this, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. End time scenario.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I don't know if you guys know about this, but it's not just like, just like one event. They think it's going to be like this layering of like pandemic events. It's very like it's very 21st century. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, hey, this is interesting. I could kind of like have something here. And through that, I wrote what is now known as Dawn of the New Ugly, which is like, I guess you could say it's like the first 14-ish hours of like a pandemic event meets like the collapse of the dollar. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I got this short story now, but I was like, who else kind of like works in this media? And that's what gave me the insight to start the group.
Interesting. Now, when did you start putting this stuff together? What year was that?
No, yeah, like I said, it must have been like that next year. It must have been like end of 2015. Because what really drew the most people to the group was, I mean, well, as you guys know, I mean, like how hectic of a political year 2016 was.
Yeah.
So, like at first, it was kind of some of the folks that are involved, like kind of like post health goth, folks who are particularly involved in it. One of the admins for the group now is like one of the creators of Health Goth. Yeah, so shout out to Mike and Jeremy, and shout out to Magic Fades. So when I first initially approached starting the group, I was like, oh, I kind of want it to be like an aesthetics thing where it's like Like that, the way that there's like, those guys in those like Patriot videos where they're always tactical gear, kind of like there's like the edge lord meets
Yes.
health guy.
Military fetishism, which kind of sometimes overlaps into pop culture. Like, I think like Duck Dynasty is kind of like an offshoot of that. It's a little different, but it definitely has those kind of like bizarre paramilitary fundamentalist kind of vibes to it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. That sort of like the Second Amendment. The love my guns. They all have this. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, this kind of faux tactical, like industrial look to it. I was just really fascinated by the whole, like I guess you could say, the fashion elements of it. So when I first started the group, where there's like that sort of stuff, and then I'm not sure if you know about that illustrator David Deese. That was definitely like an aesthetic base there. I was like,
Oh
these are
yeah,
incredible. You know what I mean? What's like all the kids getting lined up to get like injected with
yeah,
nanites because illustrations are mind bending. So it was like that was like my base, my visual basis. You know what I mean? It was
yeah.
like, and through that, people have just like it's like this massive base for like all of these articles and media and research and videos. Like it's this whole it's kind of like its own beast now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like because I've seen a lot of Facebook groups that I've been a part of that were just like one gimmick, and they just usually kind of die off. But Donna the New Ugly is always going to be timely because of the fact that there's always some new ugly on the horizon.
Yeah, agreed. That was the other thing that has surprised me over the years. It's like the longevity of the group. You know what I mean? I figured that like I said, not to harp too much on the past, but I definitely thought that like 2016, was going to be like the prime year for that group. It's like, oh, there was just so much, political, media,
Yeah,
and especially just with the proliferation, just like the rise of like the far right and everything during
yeah.
that year. I was like, this is going to be like the peak year for this group. So I totally hear what you're saying, but then yeah, thanks for saying that. Like it's definitely had this like longevity that I did not predict. Yeah.
And like I think too, just the fact that Donald Trump got elected, that was like it was like, yeah, we're in for more of this kind of stuff. I think it made the group much more relevant to people. Even though the stuff has been going on the back burner for many, many years, it's like I think for people who had some knowledge, the Trump election was kind of like a greater awareness of what was going on in the political spectrum for some. I mean, some people continue to dig their feet in and, continue to hold to kind of surface level understanding. But yeah,
Yeah. I hear what you're saying too, 200%. Yeah, because it was definitely like this. I was really interested in that as well because, like I said, it brought about like a lot of new members to the group.
yeah,
Before it was like very insular. Like I said, it was kind of like peripheral host health goth people that I was involved with, or also again, and this amazing artist. So shout out to Michael Green. I don't know if you've seen any of Michael
oh
Green's
yeah,
like artwork or anything.
yeah. His stuff is
Dude,
cool.
the guy, oof, absolute maniac, man. Yeah, have you seen his his like his mockumentary, that short film that he did?
If not, I mean, I think I have, but I haven't watched it. Can you post a link? No, it doesn't have Facebook, so he's totally.
Um,
Yeah, I'm in the dark.
and no problem. I'll hunt that down easy. It's totally it's worth the watch. It's like it's set up like yeah, the Neo Matrix, what it's called, the Neo Matrix.
Mm,
That thing is it's like it's set up like a conspiracy theory, like those like
Yes.
documentaries that are
Yeah,
like
yeah,
on YouTube, but a lot of them have been washed away by now. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Oh
mm,
yeah.
And
yeah,
where it's like the hour long,
Yes.
ooh, the
yeah.
secrets untold about 9/11, right? And then an hour long episode of YouTube.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
in that
Yeah, yeah,
style,
I
but
know what you mean.
kind of like post internet meets
Yes.
that. It's really well done. Having those sorts of minds come to the group, I think invigorated it like again, like
Yeah.
post 2016.
It's interesting because I remember like I think after the financial recession, and just like that period from like 2009 to 2012, and just because I don't know if you ever heard of this radio program, Coast to Coast AM.
Oh yeah, I love Coast to Coast.
Oh yeah. Yeah, man, I used to listen to that at nighttime, and a lot of it, like I don't want to sound like, that guy that's like super intelligent, big brain, but like I had some awareness, obviously, that a lot of the stuff they were talking about was, bullshit. But on the other hand, like this, invest in gold and all that. I was like, I don't know, man. Maybe there's something to this. So like back in 2012, and like I remember like the videos on YouTube, it seemed like there was a lot of Christian Zionist conspiracy theories on
Oh yeah.
YouTube, especially around like
Oh yeah.
Obama.
Yeah. Oh my God. Most definitely.
It was so terrible, and the strange thing is like I can't seem to find any of it anymore. It's become like lost media, and I don't know, is that something worth preserving, or is it better forgotten? I don't know. I mean, these people are still out there, but it was this whole like, zeitgeist of the time, and in a way, like Dawn of the New Ugly, this whole project you're talking about is kind of, I get it because I saw this stuff as a kid, and some of it, I didn't believe, but the aesthetics of it, like preppers, doomsday preppers, oh my gosh, that was
Mm-hmm.
like this whole other weird subculture. And it's like, on the one hand, you're fascinated by these people who are self-sufficient, and yet on the other hand, they're clearly crazy, and their family's probably in danger because they have stockpiled like 50 weapons, you know.
Yeah. They have this small arsenal. Yeah, like in their basement somewhere.
They're creating an environment for their children where it's like you growing up in this constant state of paranoia.
Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. Those cultural elements. The longer this has gone on, the more I've been fascinated with. So I've been doing like a little bit of, I guess you can say, like scholarly digging around those sort of aspects, like you said, like just phobics. You know what I mean? Like, what are the cultural basis for like fear? If
Yeah,
that makes sense,
yeah,
like what sort of stuff comes from, and like phobias that like become more than just I am afraid of X or whatever. Like you begin to act on it, and I find that whole aspect of like culture and like people's like psychology like so interesting now.
yeah,
Mm.
Because yeah, same deal. 'Cause I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Ohio, like Southwest Ohio, and you
yeah,
see a lot of not like to that extent where it's like preppers, but you see a lot of that influence across the Midwest.
yeah,
Definitely, where it's just like same deal, like you said, where it's like people who have like this massive stockpile of weapons, but then like in the next room they got like little Timmy. He's like
yeah,
13 years old. He's like dropping the N bomb on Instagram, talking about how he wants to shoot up his school. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
I always find it so weird. Like so many of those people, it's a hard thing because you don't want to make the assumption. You don't want people to draw the assumption. Oh, if you have schizophrenia, you're going to have these beliefs. But I mean, like the people that I've seen who get into this, their behavior is so damn in line with schizophrenia. It's like, what is it about these radical ideologies that they I mean, I guess it makes sense, recruit a paranoid person, but it's still like, how much of it is something that the person can't help versus something that they are willfully doing?
Mm. Now, yeah, now that's an interesting, you know what I mean? Now that's
Yeah,
an interesting paradigm because you talk about like programmatic aspects of like the mind.
yeah,
We went from like we went from armchair psychologists like say like
yeah,
what actually drives the mind? Like holy
Yeah.
shit.
And it
isn't
becomes a moral question too, sort of at that point, because if people can help it somehow, then you wanna hold them accountable for what they choose to do and not do. But if somebody is just so off their rocker that they don't have a choice anymore, it's like, well, perhaps you got to approach the problem in a different way. Maybe you don't, but it's
yeah.
hard. It's hard to say no matter what.
I'm from Dayton. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. And last year, I don't know if you guys know about this, but like 18 hours after the El Paso shooting, there was one in Dayton, Ohio.
Yes. Yeah, there was like a
Mm.
whole string.
There was there was like that massive string of them. There's still, I mean, not to, like I said, apologies if this is like coming off as insensitive, where it's like
No.
my shooting, or you know what I
No,
mean,
no, no.
something like that. But yeah, there's still, I mean, they're still occurring to this day. I mean, people are still. There was like one recently.
Yeah.
Was it that? I think it was like a
Yeah, yeah.
weekend or something like that in Texas. And yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying. Where it's like, where is that point where you step in and you're like, this needs like some sort of like intervention or something, you know? Because it's like that dude that did the shooting in Dayton, that like the writing was on the freaking wall. They kind of just like twiddled their thumb, just let him go.
Yeah.
It seems like so common in this age where we have so much information, and yet whenever these incidents happen, the real nature, the real causes, and I mean, obviously, we can know some of their motivations, but just the actions that led up to this always seem to be shrouded in this uncertainty or just misinformation.
I don't know if this is like a good thing or not to kind of like post date this podcast, but we're only a few days out from the the Iowa caucus disaster,
Oh,
and
Yeah. Yeah. We got to talk about that.
that it was so funny because I was talking to my girlfriend about this a few days ago, where I was like, how much of this is like willful negligence, and how much of this is like, this sort of like quote unquote clandestine, right? My whole thing was that I was like, hey, look, these are just like human beings. Like we've made this like mythos out of like groups like the CIA, Central Intelligence, and all this sort of stuff, and military intelligence.
Yeah.
And I came to this conclusion where I was like, I think we've given them too much credit.
yes, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it was like an absolute disaster. You know what I mean? We didn't need a WikiLeaks email or anything like that to see on its face that this was like wholly corrupt. You know what I mean? It was corrupt by internal
Yeah.
forces, internal mechanisms, you know? So I kind of came away from it. I was like, maybe we might have like, we've kind of like hyped them up a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I think if you look at the candidates that are on the field right now, whether it's Buttigieg or Biden or Warren, obviously each of these candidates, they have their pet donors who've put them in there for whatever reason, and obviously not everybody's going to make it, and so there's lots of confusion because eventually there's going to be the last man standing, and each of them wants to have that. So these conspiracies are never a perfectly orchestrated thing.
Yeah, definitely. This is what I was saying again, where it's like I think that we give these people like way too much credit. Where it's like maybe it's the level of intelligence of the, and I'm not trying to make that into a dig right now. I just want to make that it maybe the level of intelligence. You know what I'm saying? Of the people who get kind of infatuated, obsessed with these conspiracy theories and whatnot. Maybe they're the ones who are kind of like building the mythos, like a populist building of the mythos. Because same deal where it's like Jeffrey Epstein, the flight logs were there, all these pictures of him and Ghislaine Maxwell with all these famous people, and it's like out in the open for like decades. You know what I'm saying? That this dude and all these people were just morally corrupt. You know what I'm saying? So maybe it's just like not as, like I said, it's not as clandestine as we think it is. You know what I'm saying?
Even, even after the whole, like, everybody was talking about, oh, Epstein didn't kill himself, blah, blah, blah. Like,
Mm.
there was never any real sense that anybody was going to do anything about it. And so I do kind of feel at this point, like, these elites, I don't want to use a Tucker Carlson word here, but I think I will. These elites, you know, kind of feel like they have license to do whatever. And, even if it gets out, they barely have to hide it because even when it
Yeah.
gets out, like, there's essentially no repercussion. And it's just like, I don't know, it's a weird cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think the memes kind of went off base, but I don't think they ever intended for this Epstein story to gain any kind of Because I mean, the whole thing had been going on. It had been brewing for decades, and it was just totally quiet. And people got out of the streets and started protesting this guy. And it's like at that point, in my mind, I thought, there's no way this guy can continue to live because he's pissed everybody off. I mean, it's just too much of a risk, and it's almost like he enjoyed it. Like he enjoyed the fact that he had all their secrets and could just have that control over them.
Yeah. I, yeah, I think there's like a little bit in each. I think there's a little bit in each pocket there.
Yeah.
You know what you know what I'm saying? I think there's a little bit in each pocket there. Where I definitely do believe that because this is like the realm of not to make this like a like a black philosophy, like a African American psychology course right now. But there's this incredible book. It's called the Psychopathic Racial Personality. It was written by this clinical psychologist named Dr. Wright. I picked up this book last year and I've been like wholly like obsessed with it. Okay, so in this book, all right, he says that there's sort of like because of aspects of like the way that the society is built, people kind of have these predilections. You're kind of given over to neurotic behavior, sociopathic or psychotic behavior. Because if you look at the society, you know what I mean? Where it's like, think about the way that we extract fossil fuels, the way that we treat money as more important than human life, right? It kind of makes it all look like a bunch of freaking psychopaths. I mean, so I think, like I said, and I think that's like what's in the other pocket is I think that Jeffrey Epstein was surrounded by people who are all inundated in a system built by psychopaths. So it was like a psychopath maneuvering amongst other psychopaths.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you have people that are just like morally numb, and then you have a guy who's just, basically born that way, right? I mean, I know that's kind of a like philosophically that opens up a can of worms, but I'm going to simplify it and say, he's probably somebody that was, naturally this way, and he just worked his way up into, I mean, you go back to the 60s and how even somebody like Charles Manson was able to go from being in, juvenile detention to hanging out with the Beach Boys. Like, those kind of people just know how to get into the good graces of the rich and powerful. And then it's like, somebody like Epstein figured out, kind of their dirty little secrets, and he figured out how to weaponize that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's like those are the actions of like a purebred sociopath, not like a Twitter sociopath where people just kind of just like spreading the word around ad hom. Or it's just like somebody who's just like an Instagram influencer or something, and they're just like a nasty girl or whatever. This is the actions of a purebred, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sociopath person where he doesn't see human beings. He sees, like you said, a means to an end. He sees contracts. He sees models. He sees, you know what I mean? He sees all this other stuff. He's not looking at humans. And I think that's now, like I said, ever since reading that book, I looked at those sorts of drivers way different. You know what I mean? I'm like, is this person a psychopath?
Yeah.
Is this just like the that we're looking for here?
Yeah. Because I feel like that label can be thrown around too much, but at the same time, because and I've, I'm sure you have too. You meet certain people in real life who just something about them. I don't want to sound like a, hippy dippy type person, but just like your intuition says, stay away from this person, and it's like people like that. You just really have to wonder what goes on in their minds. Like this dude at my workplace one day, I'm not gonna name names here, but this dude pulls out his phone and shows me pictures of these like possums he shot on his front lawn, and I'm like, God. What the fuck? Where is this coming from? Like, dude, first of all, I barely know you, and it's like he was just like oddly aggressive about it, but like also enthusiastic about it, and I'm like, those kind of interactions really, it's like make you wonder,
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, what other animals has he armed on his quote unquote property?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's like my first thing, like heading back to the car, just being like, "Fuck, is it a
yeah,
parking lot with?" Like, holy shit! Like,
yeah, and it sucks because like there's nothing you can really do about it. Like you leave the situation being 95 to 100% sure that he's done things worse than that and probably will in the future. But
Yeah.
at the same time, you just feel totally impotent. There's very little you can do about it.
so if you do have like some sort of moral center, or you do have this like longing to kind of like recourse, you know, your interactions with humanity, it's hard to do that sort of thing because everything around you is, you know what I mean, subsisted, created by a sociopathic or psychopathic need for something.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to you as an artist, my understanding is you had at one time a label called Afternoon Modeling, which at one time had I'm not gonna I'm probably not gonna pronounce his name right, but he worked with Ferraro, Vest Tumor.
Yeah, yeah, that was before I had started afternoons modeling.
Okay,
We did a record together for Orange Milk Records. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that label, Orange Milk
a
Records.
little bit, yeah.
And before that, I did some album art for him for the label Amdiscs, Amdisc Future Reserve label. They put on that festival in Europe. It was like Creepy TP. But yeah, that was like he had done like an LP. Then he had this other project then called Teams. I did the LP cover for his record for Amdiscs, and then through that we kind of cultivated a working relationship, and we ended up doing a record for Orange Milk. But that was before afternoons modeling had like kind of like kicked off. That was like one kind of kicked into the other just to clarify the timeline. This is like a can of worms because I don't think that Yves uses that cover art anymore. It's very certainly vaporwave, let's say. I don't think that they are really like too associated with it anymore. But if you just look at the record, if you just look it up, it's like Teens, with an STES, and then Days Off is the name of the record, but it's like Days Off with no vowels. So it's like DXFSXFF, Days Off. And then you'll be able to find that original artwork from there.
Like aesthetically, what you're talking about reminds me of Witch House as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's definitely there was a definitely big Witch House influence there. Wow. I'm looking at the Discog for it right now, and it's like one on sale for $181. Which is funny because it's not like the first record that I've had like in that sort of like same deal that I've had like I've gone back and like, I've looked at Discogs and just ended up like cracking up like looking at, There's like one that I did for the label, there's like this big drama with it where I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the record label Old English Spelling Bee.
Oh,
They've
Yeah.
been doing like the new vinyl pressings of old vaporwave albums. That's the one, I think.
Yep, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one. And yeah, I definitely. I guess I could just go ahead. I could say whatever the hell I want, man. I guess I used to peripherally be friends with Ramona, who produces music as Macintosh Plus. We've fallen out of contact,
Wow.
uh, thus this time. And once I started the record label Afternoons Modeling, I was just going around just like approaching, friends of mine. So I had approached Ramona and I was like, hey, if you ever have something that you'd ever want to, it doesn't have to be anything major, but maybe we should work on something together. You know what I'm saying? And I'll do a release for you with this new label I've started. The project is called Tanning Salon. The album is called Dream Castle. I don't know if you guys have heard that like Macintosh Plus like side project or not. Oh yeah, I mean it's been re-released like since then on Old English Spelling Bee, but originally I did like a cassette release for it, and it went over very well, But that's what I was saying about with the whole Discord thing. It's funny as soon as you type in Tanning Salon Dream Castle on Google, it's like the other one just does not. It's just been like wiped. It was like wait. What's that? This has always been on Old English Spelling Bee. Yeah, I won't go into that whole. I think that's probably as far as I'll poke off the whole
Sure.
thing. So yeah, my comment will just rest at that. Yeah, I did like a cassette release for it. We did like 4 runs of the cassette. It's funny if you look on the Discog, it's the same deal where it's like one copy of the cassette release is like $100 or that. It's really funny. But Old English Spelling Bee and Ramona's manager at the time, because I say at the time because I'm not sure if they're still managing Ramona, had approached me about the whole Old English Spelling Bee thing. And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. I was like, is there some sort of, you know, middle ground that we can reach about the record? Like, I was still producing copies of it and whatnot. But long short, it ended up all going down the tube. So now it all belongs to Old English Spelling Bee.
Oh
and
no.
yeah. But then you guys saw that whole fallout. And like I said, I don't want to cause drama saying this sort of stuff on the podcast. But you guys, everybody knows about that whole Mac Plus. What is that freaking record? The floral shop, tanning salon, having such a big drama on Old English Spelling Bee. I'll leave it there.
It just seemed like, Floral Shop is not even my favorite Vectroid album. And I guess, but it became such a meme that was, the one that, got all the attention. And then, there's all those things with the owner and all that, which, I won't go into because I only peripherally, follow that stuff. I was trying like mad to stay away from the Vaporwave subreddit. It was a very interesting time. I think, you were seeing a lot of different aesthetics emerging. I mean, I'd look at, just what you posted, the teams, and it's like, at that time it would have been considered vaporwave, but, you can see influences or, future influences where those kind of designs went and kind of diverged later on.
Yeah, that was like the most interesting part to me was like the visual, like I was saying with Donna the New Ugly, where
Yeah.
it's like I was just so interested in those visual aesthetics and the way that people were choosing to represent themselves, in the visual arts in that way. I was really captivated by it. I thought that was like the coolest thing where it's like that appropriative art style, sample-based art style and everything. I was so captivated by it. I thought it was a really
Yeah, it was like Neo Dada in a way.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely this sort of like I said, like a William Burroughs, Dada-esque,
Hmm.
or sort of like it's hard to explain, but it's definitely like a late 20th, early 20th century, late stage capitalism, if you will, like take on those sorts of things. I thought that was so cool about that time. But like I said, all sorts of like, man, ugh,
Yeah.
if you kick up the rug, like I said, even with the Old English Spelling Bee, that's just like the corner of the. There's some really like drama-filled stories about the whole community. Oh yeah, like you said, like stay away from the subreddits. I like just troll the R vaporwave subreddit. That thing is always like giving me just like this is like I said. And again, like I don't want to make this into like a
Sure,
race
sure.
thing right now, you know. But there is a big issue with vaporwave artists and no one even like really, especially like we were saying with floral shop, there is no appreciation of like within, especially now, especially in the canon now, there's like zero if any appreciation of like the original influences on that
Yeah.
sample style being black music, and
Hmm.
I've always had like a big problem with that. And then as like the vaporwave genre grew, I was like a bit vocal about it, but not to the point where I think it influenced anything because we see how vaporwave stands today. Where I was just like, dude, this is kind of like screwy. This is like clearly like a aspects of this was like a black music style, but then the African American artists, the black artists that are a part of this genre, you guys like pretend like they're nobody, you know what I mean? Nobody like did the work here, and that's what really pissed me off about the whole thing.
Just the nature of vaporwave does descend too from chopped and screwed music. So
Yeah, that's exactly what I
Yeah,
was
and I
getting
mean,
at.
particularly with Floral Shop, since it was such a pinnacle, not pinnacle. what's it? I don't know. It was an important vaporwave release. But anyways, like part of what made it a monumental in my mind is just the fact that it was the first. It sort of displayed how aesthetics and just certain styles and ideas just become totally meaningless in that consumerist sort of void because like you were saying, there's a lot of samples of black music in there, but there's also like, this weird fetishism for like marble statues and the Hellenic. Yeah, and I think somewhere along the line, people just got the idea that like, oh, vaporwave is criticizing all of these things, and it's like, no, not necessarily. It's just that it's using these things to make a point. And in the process, I think a lot of people started to feel like, oh, well, this like funk music or whatever that it's sampling is soulless and commercial. So therefore, it's if we would like do stupid things to it and not give anybody any credit for anything. Was just like I was not an active member of the community at the time, but it feels like a corruption of what the original idea would have been.
But you just look at the art style of vaporwave now. Like clearly in its infancy, it was much more fruitful creatively, and I mean, I think people like George Clanton are certainly doing interesting things now. I'm not sure if they're really what vaporwave really even is anymore, but it just seems like a lot of people in the genre just I mean it is a meme, but it really is true. It's like they saw Floral Shop and it's like, oh, Roman bust, checkered floor, 80s, and then you get into like the whole weird like 80s nostalgia, but like in this like retro wave thing, and people start to draw these like weird connections with the whole fash wave and all that, because that came about because the aesthetic was just so diluted at that point that it was basically the opposite of what it started out, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I that's it. Again, I appreciate you guys saying that because there's I definitely feel like I said, I don't want to make this into like a race thing, but you could definitely see, like you were saying, I thought that was really interesting too, where it was like the fast wave elements,
Hmm.
where how they took from within those sort of cultural motivations within the genre is what gave way for people to be like, well, if it's cool for you to just take this, well, then I can take this as well. I always thought that was so interesting. So I appreciate you saying that.
It's like people who watch American Psycho and unironically like Patrick Bateman, or watch Fight Club and unironically like, Tyler Durden. It seems to me those are the kind of people that would get into something like Fash Wave, unironically liking this soulless element of it, because that's what the music reflects. I've heard Fash Wave and it sounds like garbage, and all their art is garbage. It really reflects in terms of their outlook on life.
Yeah, it's again, that's really funny you should say that because it's like, especially like over the once I got here to Australia, I did like a little bit of a deep dive into it. So this was like 2017, like 2018. I was like looking in the fast wave stuff, and it's freaking hilarious, man. Like you said, it's like I agree. It's just like I mean, not to like stick my nose up in the air. I was like, oh, this could be so much better, or like that. But you're right. It's a bit shit can though.
Most of the people that are involved in the movement, don't even really like talk about it anymore. It's just like something that was briefly they tried to make a thing and then quickly abandoned. I mean, I'm curious because it's like the alt right tries to reappropriate everything, and they've done it to some success with 4chan memes. But the one thing they don't want to appropriate is minions.
Oh,
You
That's
notice?
you
a
think there's like
fact.
some?
That's a fact. They're afraid.
They're
You think there's something else going on in there? Really?
well,
I hadn't noticed that. That's interesting.
like because like how it's so associated with baby boomers, and realistically, like how different are a lot of the things the alt right talk about from like right wing baby boomers. Like, it seems like their main sticking point is that they're not openly racist enough, or they support Israel, all this stuff. Um, and it's like they don't want to be seen as like their parents. And the Minion has that context of being the normie. It has that ugly connotation to it. It's quite interesting.
I have to do a deep dive into that.
Yeah. Minion Wave.
Yeah, Minion Wave. On that whole tip of like old English and these kind of like breakoffs from vaporwave.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you guys have paid attention to anything from like the genre hard vapor.
I saw that tangentially and it didn't look good, so I just avoided it.
Yeah,
Same deal.
I mean, I'm familiar with the concept of hard vapor, but I won't pretend to be a real like in the know about it.
I thought the music was pretty interesting. I thought there was some really interesting music that came out of that.
Mm.
But same deal, just as quickly as it started, it's been dropped though. It's interesting because it was like I was like showing it to like a friend of mine who lives here in Australia now, but like she grew up in she grew up in the failing I guess Soviet Union,
Uh-huh.
the end of the Soviet Union. You know what I mean? That's where that's when she grew up before her parents brought her here to Australia. And I don't know
Hmm.
if you guys know the visual aesthetics of like hard vapor at all. Like kind of like post Russia Gate sort of like you know what I mean? It's very kind
Hmm.
of like this same thing with the fast wave, but it's like this like this obsession. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it
Like this.
has like a, and this is me as an outsider commenting on it, but it gives off apocalyptic, like Slavic kind of vibes, like that whole conflict in
Yeah,
that
definitely,
area.
200%. And I was like showing them like a lot of the artwork and like playing them the music and stuff. And we had this pretty like interesting conversation about the whole thing where it's like this. It's very like I mean, aspects of it are very like I don't know, like I guess it's sort of like Orientalism. Part of
Yeah.
it is like you know what I mean because there's like a whole lot of like North Korea worship. There was like a lot of infatuation with that and the visual aesthetics of that, and like the KGB and like
Yeah.
Russian hacking and that sort of thing. And yeah, I was like talking to like our friend about it. And she was like, this is like xenophobic," and I was like, "Oh shit, I did not realize that." But I thought I thought the music was interesting. Only in like I was saying earlier, where it's like I kind of come from like a noise and like
Yeah.
industrial kind of like background, So I thought elements of it was like really cool. So I stuck around for a bit and was like checking out some of the tunes.
I feel like
Mm.
industrial music has had that connotation though for a long time of like certain industrial bands or acts that will take like this very offensive, or I guess it overlaps with punk maybe too, militaristic imagery. I'm sure Noah would know more on the subject because he follows more of this stuff than I would. But that's just I guess I could see parallels with that, and the infatuation with Soviet aesthetics. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about industrial stuff, like going back into, I mean, back to the very beginning, it always had this sort of a weird, militaristic, occult sort of vibe to it. A group like Throbbing Gristle is a really good example of that. And I mean, I guess that, like you said, to some extent it was present in punk too, but I feel like I don't know. What's interesting about Hard Vapor is the fact that it's so much about producers rather than like groups that are going around performing and doing concerts. So there's sort of, even if the producers aren't technically anonymous, like there is this sort of vibe of anonymity to it where it's not about the performer. It
yeah,
is
yeah.
much
That's
more
true.
about just, what's trying to be painted, which uh, I don't know, that it makes you analyze it in a different way.
But yeah, again, I appreciate you saying that because that's one of the things that kind of had me like stick around a bit. Was it's like I said, it definitely is trying to say like socio-political things. I just don't think that their message, the messaging was like as strong as something as Throbbing Gristle or something like, you
Yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean? Where it's like definitely like they were trying to
that's a good
say like
point.
profound, but it didn't nail it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much that like the message of the hard vapor stuff is bad. It's just that it's more vague. Group like, Throbbing Gristle and later on Psychic TV, we're not going to let you walk away not knowing what they thought about something. Whereas with this hard vapor, a lot of this stuff, and just a lot of media nowadays too, whether it's like stuff like Million Dollar Extreme, or not that that's the exact same thing, but it uses similar tactics of like being so vague and quote unquote thought provoking. It leaves you, not quite being sure what you're supposed to take away from it. And I don't know. Yeah, it's a very strange thing. There seems to be having a position on things is almost frowned upon in some of these like artsy circles.
And there's a lot of edgelording too, that you start to wonder where it's like, is this person doing it because they're just out there trying to provoke, or are they doing it in some sort of nefarious, which I think is definitely seems to be the case with Million Dollar Extreme.
Oh, 200%. Oh, 200%. Fucking Sam Hyde is straight up, yeah, it's like Nazi adjacent.
In his latest video, he had Nick Fuentes. Like, there's no bones about what he's trying.
Holy shit, I didn't know that, because he does, like, they're behind, all his new videos and stuff are like behind a paywall or something.
He leaks his videos or whatever on YouTube.
Yeah, it is a paywall only in name.
Crazy. I had no idea. I watched like one of the ones that kind of post Million Dollar Extreme. He was like doing those longer form videos, and I was like, this is just straight up like all right gateway. Like, not even hiding it anymore.
Yeah, and it's a shame because like a lot of those early ones, sure there was some stuff that wasn't so good, but it was presented still with that sort of weird ironic detachment where you maybe couldn't quite tell what he was going for. And there was a lot of cool, some of them were just like stupid stuff he would record on a cell phone, but some of them, there was a lot of, cool editing and stuff, very neat final products. And it's just like, I don't know. I mean, it's a shame because some of that stuff was so interesting, but it's just like clearly not being used.
Yeah, it's being used for propaganda.
Purpose. Yeah. But at the same time, it's so weird because it's not like the kind of propaganda you'd think would be effective because it's so weird and experimental.
It goes back to the whole, kind of motive of Alexander Dugin, where it's like you use the quote-unquote Western art, degenerative art, against itself. But the problem is these people that, claim to do it for some kind of higher moralistic purpose, which I don't even know is, the case. It's like when you have that attitude, how can you not become, just as cynical as the people you claim to be against?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Am Hyde. The Pandora's box right there, that man.
Yeah. First, we cover all the drama topics. We've got Sam Hyde, we've got the, vaporwave community, and
Vapor, yeah, we got Fast Wave, conspiracy theories. It's gonna be good. It's a great episode.
Welcome back to the World Movers podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Noah, aka 51st Citizen, with our guest, friend of the show, Jono Mi Lo. When we last left off, we were talking about a variety of different music and media commentaries. And I really wanted to go back and sort of touch on a related topic to, all this media and stuff. How has it been, your perspective from first getting on the internet? I guess, like, when did you first start going on the internet actively? And how has it been seeing the whole culture, change from 2010s to now? And, just how was that experience for you?
There's a lot in that question. Hopefully, I'll try to give it something bite sized because I'm a bit older than like most folks. Like I'm like peering into my 40s now. So, um, as far as like online music and like culture, I didn't really become too activated in that until kind of like the post Friendster, like MySpace era. MySpace was definitely like that's how I got generated very quickly, very heavily into underground sort of
Yeah.
DIY music culture. Just like from all over the United States, because that was like the easiest way. And also, like again, like I said, then I was like a budding musician. It's really easy for me to like find people that worked in the same aesthetics and sounds and communities that were like pretty similar, and then I could kind of grow from there.
Yeah.
So it was definitely, I guess you could say mid 2000s, like kind of like post 9/11. I'd say like 2005 and 8ish, kind of like that blooming period. You know what I'm saying? Kind of understand what those communities stood for, looking into the histories of them, and like understanding it a little bit more. But by like 2010, 2011, like things had changed drastically. And my thing then was like, I guess you could say I did like a bit of like trend forecasting for myself, where I was like, oh, I see, there's like these dance styles. People have been re-influenced by like, like workstations like Fruity Loops again, saying like with Witch House. And I was like, I think that there's like these other genres or something else is being cultivated here. And that's what led me to, like I said, to try to find people, like I said, like Macintosh Plus, like Yves Tumor and so on during that time to try to find a new community for myself, and that's what led me into the electronic styles that I produce in today.
And just like this is kind of off topic, but like MySpace, I mean, I remember in 2008 when MySpace was probably beginning to decline, so I was probably like only 12 or 13, and it's so fucking strange. I remember all the stuff that's like looked as ironically today, like the blingy gifs and like the just that like seedy quality, because MySpace you could edit your profiles and all that. And I remember going down like this rabbit hole of weird like MySpace groups. And it's so strange because, here it is, a new decade, and in a way, on the one hand it feels like a long time, but on the other hand it feels like just yesterday. And it's so strange to watch something like that just go from being a cultural phenomenon to just dying completely.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I've noticed that a lot as well, where it was like a lot of like those kind of like we were talking like about throbbing gristle, psychic TV, and a lot of those sort of like those
Mm.
posts like Wolf Eye, that sort of thing. A lot of them have kind of like they've heard the bell toll now too. Where I'm not saying Wolf Eyes, I'm not trying to make a diss right now. I'm just saying that there's like a lot of peripheral groups that all grew around the same time that have heard like the death toll. Like it's really interesting. It's like I was like, oh man, those guys will be making music forever. Oh, it's so interesting. Oh, the things that they do that can always grow within those styles. And then it's like I look at them now and I'm like, oh, well, like what are those groups doing, or what is that artist doing? And oh, they don't produce music anymore. They've stopped. Or like I'm like, oh wow, interesting. You'd figure that like outside of that 5-ish year, 8-ish year window, that they'd be able to have the thing bloom out of it. Yeah, it's been washed. I don't know if it's just like because of the platforms changing. I don't know if it's like the culture changing. I see that everywhere. I see that like in visual art styles, and I see it in music all the time.
Yeah, and for me and Noah, I think the big one for us was like, Death Grips. Like Death Grips, they went from being very relevant and like, okay, this is the future of something, and then it's like, you don't like you don't hear anything about it anymore. Like all the girls that were like edgy Death Grips fans have now moved on. Like
I
all
didn't
the
know about those, man.
yeah, I knew a few. So online,
Bro. But yeah, like I know what you mean. It's I mean, to be fair, do still have a they still have a kind of a rabid fan base, but
oh
it's a
yeah,
very niche fan base. It's not they're not making headlines anymore. I think it kind of died out like permanently after like the working with the Shrek director on You're the Snitch, and all he does is like he says a couple lines at the beginning of a song. Like the attempt at media baiting just became so obvious that nobody really cared anymore. But I'm probably exaggerating. They'll probably do some crazy thing and be on Pitchfork again at some point. But even then, like how much cultural influence does Pitchfork really have? You know?
Mm. Yeah, that's a whole other pitch right there. Not to make it into a tangent, but I've noticed that a lot. Like music journalism just does not have the strength that it did like in the early 2010s. It was like altered zones and like that whole kind of like blogosphere, just like the community was just so strong. Or it's literally like you could see someone on a blog in like 2010, and then they were in the festival circuit by the next year. And now just music journalism just does not have the strength that it did like a decade ago. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
it seemed like because I wasn't following all of this, but when I would read an exposition on a certain genre, it seemed like really final or conclusive. Where now, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I've grown, but it's like I'm inclined to take people's opinion on music with a much larger grain of salt.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a good example of that is like when that 100 gecs album came out last year,
Yeah.
and Pitchfork, Pitchfork did a very thorough review of it, and they gave it like a 7.6 or something. Like some it's one of those scores that's like, I support it, but I don't want to pretend like I care about it. I don't know. I think the purpose of that piece of art was not necessarily for people to write a friggin' dissertation.
Yeah, I agree. It's always like the most you could take it on the surface. It's like we were saying earlier about like with Sam Hyde. If people just took it on the freaking surface, where there's like you said, the vagaries. Like if you're like, okay, this person is sure that's what the vehicle that they're using, but this thing on the surface is still, this guy's still a racist. He's still a piece of shit. Yeah, you don't have to. It's not that deep.
I don't necessarily think that all music criticism is a bad thing. Sometimes it can be good because it gets you to think about music in a different way, or at least a certain piece of music. But just like, I don't know, particularly in the area of like PC music or just any new pop music that has interesting production or whatever, there is something to be said about it, people throw around the word overanalyzing a lot, but there's a lot to analyze in the world. So I don't want to blame people for going into that, but just like it's this sort of with sites like Pitchfork in particular, it's this sort of sense of like they give off this aura as though they know something that you don't, that their score actually like means something.
There's definitely like people who probably floated to websites like Pitchfork, Paste, etc., because they were just like a journalist. It's like you picked up all of your cultural norms and your ideas from people who also were peripheral music. They were a part of the music.
Yeah.
They weren't in bands. The people who paid the $15 door fee to stand around and act like they knew what was going on. They had never seen a green room. Had never sat at a mixing desk or whatever. But now all of a sudden you wield this like massive amount of power.
I don't want to say a vicious cycle because that's not exactly what it is, but people start paying attention to the reviews you write or whatever, and then all of a sudden, you feel like they really maybe my opinions do have some greater significance, and I should keep going. And it's like, not that you shouldn't, not that you can't talk about music, but just like Pitchfork is, like that you just get a random writer to write about a particular thing, and then this like weird number that was somehow calculated between 0.0 and 10.0, and it stands forever unless they decide to revise it. And the fact that when they revise a score it's such a big deal just shows, like, I don't know. It's not just that they take so much stock in it and it's ridiculous, but that, like, there are groups of people who also take stock in it, which is ridiculous. Like particularly on Mew, not a place I'm proud to visit, but every now and then I do, and it's just like, uh, Pitchfork and the scores they give things. At least back when I would be on there, it was a frequent topic of conversation.
Fascinating. My other I guess I've been banging my head up against this recently as well, because I don't know, because like you were saying, like the dissertation, the kind of like intellectual waxing that went on recently. I don't know if you guys saw this, but it was like a conceptronica. I don't
I
know if
haven't
you saw
heard
the
of
article.
this.
Yeah, it's supposed to kind of be like them doing this like predictive journalism where it's like, well, what's post deconstructed deconstructed club music, and yeah,
Mm.
conceptronica. I'll put it. No,
Man, I mean, the idea of a
no.
concept album in and of itself, which I'm assuming that term is a play on, is also just like a meaningless invention of music journalists who are like, like, what is a concept album? Every album has some sort of a vague concept, I suppose.
I know, and it's on Pitchfork too. How good is
Yeah.
that?
The subtitle here of why so much electronic music this decade felt like it belonged in a museum instead of a club. I think part of that is because you painted it that way, Pitchfork. I mean, like, not to, I don't know, not to rag on Pitchfork too much, because to be fair, their influence is declining, and I don't want to kick them while they're down. But just like, there's this weird attitude from Pitchfork a lot, I think, and I think it's kind of exemplified pretty well in that subtitle, not subtitle,
Secondary
the
title?
line "Why so much electronic music this decade felt like it belonged in a museum instead of a club." This idea that there should be some prestige of museum over club, and the idea, like, oh, this electronic music that we all know is very, lowbrow, whatever. Well, I'm here to tell you it's actually quite clever, and it's like, no, we don't need to, just shut up.
I mean, I've spent, especially now with like the music that I've produced over the years, you know, I felt like there were more like spaces where, which again is interesting because, we were talking about the whole noise and industrial connection to a lot of these genres like deconstructed club, hard vapor, and so on. I've spent more time in people's basements, and galleries watching like a noise artist and then watching a performance artist than I have, you know, in the club. Most of those people have
Mm,
trajectories that lead them to playing like places like the Brooklyn Museum and MoMA as opposed to like your local DJ club. You know what I mean?
yeah.
If you were to go watch someone of like one of these genres, right? You're still going to see a DJ there. I don't know. I just see so much faulty logic. Even though we haven't poked at the article, I just find it interesting. There's just like so many watery holes we can just like poke into this thing.
I'm just pissing all over it. I haven't even read the thing. I don't know. That's how much I do not vibe with Pitchfork. I don't even want to read the article. And even if I read it and I found out that it's actually saying the opposite of what I think it's saying, or I read and I think, oh, the message is actually good. Like, I don't care. Still, I just don't care. Not even gonna read your article. That's my act of defiance here.
Yeah, and I think, for at least for me, the way that I discovered music wasn't through review sites. It was just going online and searching this music out myself. looking up samples the vaporwave artists had used, and I found a lot of great artists and bands through that. One band in particular being Enigma. I never would have found that if it wasn't for me going out on my own and looking this stuff up. No review site was going to introduce this to me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. Like, I wouldn't call like I mean, I wasn't like an Enigma like person. I was like peripherally like enjoyed them as
Uh,
well. But my big thing was like the like progressive and like fusion, like jazz. Because like my father was like obsessed with that sort of stuff. I always like used to sit at this intersection with vaporwave, and you hear it a lot now, especially with like the last two One Tricks Point Never records. There's so much like progressive and new age influence in the last two One Tricks Point Never records.
oh yeah, James Ferraro too.
Yeah, 200%. There was like a couple of like tweets that he had like posted, and this is like a long time ago, where there was like some groups that I've been like I said, through my father, I've been like introduced to, you know. It was like Manhattan Transfer and like the
Oh
Yellow
yeah,
Jackets and like that sort of stuff, with that mad like jazz fusion. That
yeah.
stuff, like wow, you know. I've been like waiting basically for like there to be like a vaporwave group where it's like there's jazz fusion now.
Definitely love to do like I look at all and it's a little different probably than the stuff you like, but just I see the stuff from Enigma. I see like stuff that's popular now, like PC music, like Sad Boys, Blade, and I want to take all those genres and just kind of mix those kind of sound styles in this kind of like improvisational format.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I want too.
I mean that yeah, that could be cool. You know, that's funny you should say that because I don't know too much about. I guess that's sort of like because I guess you could say we're sort of like post Sad Boys as well, and I never really like touched down on too much of that. A lot of it is like it's pretty foreign to me, but it would be interesting to see if somebody like improvises in those styles.
I
That's
mean,
any
I'm not gonna say like, oh, Drain
consolation.
Gang and all that is the best thing going on in pop, but it's certainly interesting. And like, I see all these different styles, and it's like, I want to take it to that next level. Maybe, not better, but just like, bring all that in some kind of improvisational type, session.
I've been trying to find, I guess, like the my voice in that sort of like improvisation. I've turned recently a lot to like Max MSP, and I love having like applications and like Max MSP patches that like produce MIDI chords and like use music theory for you. Like I'm really bad at writing like music theory. You know what I mean? It's like a
Sure.
lot of my stuff whenever I'm writing MIDI, I'm like, man, this sounds like the last like 10 demos. Can I find something different within myself? And I've realized, I'm just not that strong when it comes to music theory. Max MSP is like really great for that sort of stuff. And
Hmm.
I've been trying to find patches and applications that like generate random MIDI. And man, there
Ooh.
is some like stuff like it's borderline, like you were saying, where it's like I'll throw in like a 90s, like a Juno DX7, all this stuff, and then I'll feed it the random MIDI from Max MSP, and it has this one of tricks James Ferraro esque sound to it. It sounds incredible, but I've been
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to find more in it though. It's really
It's
cool
like
stuff.
there's this one website like the stochastic melody generator, and you just give it a bunch of parameters like how much of a tonal center do you want the melody to have? How long do you want it to be? What kind of rhythmic variation do you want? You just like input a bunch of stuff, and it'll it frames it in like in terms of like numbers 1 to 5 or whatever for all these parameters, and then you just click the end and you get a little MIDI track at the end. It's pretty cool. To backtrack, just with like trying to improvise with all these newer styles and genres, like it seems like a very cool idea, and part of me keeps thinking like, oh, why haven't people done it? But at the same time, it is sort of just like a thing about the medium it's a lot of this stuff is it's very polished, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that there's so much stuff and time that goes into the production, whether it's the instrumental or just actually working on the vocal track, that, the idea of letting something, just like controlling something as you go in the live performance, we'll do it with vocals, but barely, because they'll usually leave the recorded mixed vocal track in for them to fall back on if they want to, like, ad lib on their own thing, or take a second to just get their crowd to sing or whatever. Which is like, I'm not ragging on any of that. It's a different kind of performance, and what it'd be like asking people doing like a really high budget film like Tarantino or whatever to just like, oh, why don't they improvise? There's so many like things that have to come together a lot of the time that are pretty expensive. Like some of this, music production, you can get a lot of sounds just for free, with Ingenuity, cracked version of FL Studio,
Yeah.
that you might be able to get with an expensive setup. But regardless, it still takes time.
I think you could still work within it, and even, maybe not fully off the cuff. I really like how in the late '90s Prince was producing his albums, and he would have what start out like a typical R&B beat, and then he would throw in this crazy solo that just that was his calling card. Or this one track he has, which I sent to Noah, The Human Body, and it's got like this industrial
Yes, that's
house
exactly what I
trap,
was thinking of.
and it's like, dude, he literally could have ghost produced for house producers in the '90s, and you wouldn't know it. And on the surface, you wouldn't expect it, but it's like, yeah, this is the guy who's crossed over with punk and numerous other genres. So, I mean, somebody like that, the dynamic, music making ability is really inspirational to me.
Yeah, that's again. There's a lot to unpack there. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
There's a lot to unpack there with like where we've gone and this half. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where I agree. Where it's like, you have to be like a multifaceted, multidisciplined artist like Prince to have something like that in your repertoire. And I
Yeah.
think what we're asking for is like, again, like you said, not to sound like a boomer, but they just don't make them like that
Yeah. Yeah,
anymore.
no. Because me and Noah, we've been talking
Yeah.
about that. Like, you think, okay, this new rap style, somebody's going to come and really do something crazy with it. Extent, people like Blade kind of push it, but, it feels like there's always this barrier. And
On the whole, like, boomerism kind of a point of like, oh, they don't do music like they used to. I think on both sides of that argument, there's guys who are like, oh, well, music is the same as it ever was, it's just slightly different. And then of course you have the, quote unquote, sort of boomer music defender type position, which is like, oh, music is on constant decline,
yeah,
worse and worse and worse. And I think both sides are kind of not acknowledging that, like, the medium is changing and the music is different. It doesn't mean it's worse, but like it is different. It is different in a lot of ways, and not just in how it sounds. It's different in how it is performed, how it can be performed.
yeah,
The medium of mainly just of computer production, and that being available to everybody, it's really, it changes everything, and it's not necessarily for the worse, but it does change things a lot. And one of those things is that you don't get that sort of fiery improvisational off the cuff sort of dynamic as much, at least in terms of strict musical performance. But somebody like Lil Uzi Vert, like that classic thing at Rolling Loud where he like backflipped off of a part of the stage or something like that, like, people find new ways to make the performance interesting. And is it becoming a little bit of a circus? Sure, but like, in a sense, that's what live music is.
yes,
That just reminds me so much of like one of my favorite forms of entertainment is professional wrestling.
Hmm.
I'm like
Interesting.
obsessed with pro wrestling. Oh yeah, oh man. I mean, it's part like I've been watching it since I was like a kid, and then there was like just like the younger elements that still kind of like there's like a nostalgia. But the older I've gotten and the more that I've seen, like I said, backstages, green rooms, seeing how like the music industry actually works, I see so many parallels between it and professional wrestling. I'm always like, oh, hey, yeah, like as you were saying with the kind of like circus. I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, definitely. Backstage at a massive festival probably feels exactly the same as like backstage at a wrestling event.
That's interesting. That's not a world that I know much about, but it is interesting to me. And I think in the past couple of years, like especially like we rented out a place and put on a concert, and we're gearing up to do another one of those things. Like just realizing that like in practice, live music is not all about coming up with, just practicing really hard and becoming really good at music. Like that's an important part of it. And if that's, really what you want to do, but a lot of it is just like performance art, showbiz kind of whatever you want to call it, that sort of theater aspect, which I suspect is very present in professional wrestling.
A lot of theatrics, a lot of pageantry, a lot of pageantry. Which is like my favorite thing is the pageantry. I can't even lie. You know what I mean? Watching like
Yeah.
some dude that's like 6'10", 280 pounds, like flexing his freaking pecs while it's like firework, like going off behind him, and dude
Yeah.
is so enthralling. You know what I mean? Especially when you
Right.
go and see it live. Oh my god, it's like being on a different planet. And like the audiences too. I imagine like if you went to something where it was like a little Pump concert or something like that, or 21 Savage, like one of the bigger, newer names, and how like just like the audience will probably just come unglued as soon as they like step on stage. I imagine it's pretty comparable to like watching someone like John Cena or The Rock or something like that. Like, because people, it's like a
Probably.
pandemonium.
And like, yeah, I've known people, and it's like, it's wrestling is one of those things. I mean, I'm pretty ambivalent to it, but it's like people love it or they don't watch it, and the people that watch it, that's part of their life. It's part of their identity, and I can definitely see how watching wrestling and then seeing the spectacle that's politics today. I can see how that directly influenced your aesthetic taste with Dawn of the New Ugly.
Oh
Mm.
yeah, yeah. Like I said, most definitely. Again, not to make it like too about pro wrestling, but everybody knows now about the connection between the WWE and and Donald Trump.
I know.
It's a whole insular world of these psychopathic billionaires sharing money, you know what I mean, sharing connections and sharing resources with one another. It's like right there, like right on the surface. If you were to actually look into the history and like lives of a lot of these pro wrestlers, it reminds me again like of like a lot of like those kind of like heavy metal type stories where it's like the person kind of just like burns themselves out. And it's like I always push up against people where there's this thing that happens where it's like everybody always falls back on this laurel of like pro wrestling is fake. Dude, if it was freaking fake, then why do these guys all have brain trauma and like broken necks and like
Yeah.
spinal damage, all these nerve injuries.
That lifestyle takes impact on you. There's no doubt about it. It's very rare somebody that I'm aware of, makes it to the level of like a John Cena. I mean, a lot of people just get forgotten about.
Most definitely 200%. I can, and like I said, with this whole tying it back to music, man, think about how many freaking SoundCloud rappers, YouTube people, or YouTube or influencer stars are all gonna fall to the same fate.
I mean, they have been. A Lil Pump is basically irrelevant now. Just that whole wave. I mean, XX is dead. Takashi is, in jail. I mean, that whole wave of SoundCloud rap is basically gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because like I remember back when the was it 2017 double XL freshman list came out, and everybody was thinking that XXX and Ugly God were going to be like the next big thing, right? And Playboy Cardi, everybody was like, "Oh God, Playboy Cardi embarrassed himself with his stupid ass freestyle or whatever the hell it was." But like now, Playboy Cardi is on top of the world. I think Playboy Cardi had the long-term vision that guys like Lil Pump or XXX just did not have. Well, I can't. I guess I can't speak about XXX because if he was still alive, who knows where he would have taken his career. But Lil
Yeah.
Pump for sure just burned himself out real fast. In terms of his health, and also in terms of like his popularity.
Yeah, as far as like his popularity is concerned, I mean, unless something like miraculous happens in 2020, because it's too early to tell. It's too early in the year for us. Again, not to like date this. It's too early to call, fellas. You know what I mean? We're only second week of February. Shit, you never know those sorts of people where it's like once you get to a certain realm, within that, like I was saying, like with professional wrestling, because there's whole groups of producers and writers, just like a television show that built John Cena that we never talk about. You know what I'm saying? We just think that he's just out there, just a man in the mic in his hands. Yeah, there's like a whole entire crew of producers led up to the moment where he, like, you know what I mean, sticks the freaking thumb up in the air and the crowd goes wild. So,
Yeah,
I the only reason I say that is you can't count out people like Little Pump in those aspects. Only in that you don't know what those producers and those people who create those influencers and those stars are like thinking. You know what I mean? Because they're cruising Instagram,
yeah,
they're cruising YouTube every single day, and they'll throw something up against the wall just to see if it sticks. It'll be like Little Pump
that's
and Billie
true.
Eilish
Yep.
next freaking week.
I think the thing with Lil Pump is that like when his debut album came out in 2017, or actually a little before that, when the few singles that made it onto it that were really popular were coming out, it was just such a like noisy, ridiculous sound, like Smoke Perp's production. Like it just sounded like random MIDI piano stuff. Like it had a very distinct, obnoxious sound to it. And it like, whether people liked it or didn't like it or just thought it was kind of funny and stupid, like it grabbed your attention. And the thing is when he put out Harvard Dropout, his second album, it was just like it was polished and it wasn't bad, but the fact that it wasn't bad was its downfall because it wasn't interesting anymore. And so like sure, if it's certainly possible that Lil Pump could get back to that sort of thing, or that the people who propped him up could have a new vision for him in 2020. But I think it's just as likely that they would just switch to some other random person.
This has turned into the Little Pump like shit on Little Pump hour. But
Well,
yeah,
I'm not against Lil Pump. Like I think, I enjoyed his first album and all that sort of thing. And I don't have any I don't have any beef with him personally. He's never hurt me in any way, but like I don't know. I just don't think Harvard Dropout was a very good album. And I think a lot of people just it wasn't interesting. It wasn't as interesting as his early stuff.
yeah. I listened to that last one, and like I said, because I came to the whole thing late. I found out about, like you were saying, like his connection to to that SoundCloud kind of world star hip hop crew like way later. I pieced the history together way later. And
Mm,
yeah, when I went and listened to that last album, the one that has Gucci Gang and all the other bigger hits on it, I was not impressed by it at all. You know,
mm.
like I was like one of those people where it was like I lend a I was I'll admit I definitely lended an ear to the like is Little Pump like an industry plant, which is totally not true. But it was like
Yeah.
there was a parlance there. I was like, oh is this how they build
Yeah.
them now? I was like, oh, this is so interesting. Like I just didn't know. I just didn't have the history.
Right.
Yeah.
But I didn't think I just didn't think that album really had. Yeah, I wasn't excited by it at all.
Yeah. I don't know. To be fair, like some of the best early Lil Pump songs didn't even make it on there. Like I don't know if you know, he had a song that was just called Lil Pump, and he had a song called Elementary. And those two songs, produced by Smoke Perp, I think were pretty like I don't know, those were very they summed up what was good about him pretty well, which was just being extremely ridiculous with like a weird, very awkward sounding beat with this sort of inhuman confidence.
And I
Like
think,
even on his self-titled album, now that you mention it, like the song with Chief Keef, stuff like that, like a lot of that stuff was definitely put together after the fact, after he had blown up off the more rough cuts
yeah,
by some guys who were like, oh, it'd be real great if we got him with this superstar. It'd be real great if we got him a song with Rick Ross.
yeah, and I think the other problem is at the end of the day, he was still a kid when that was happening, and he was very obviously being exploited by his managers. I know co-host of the podcast Kwaku was telling me about how one of Lil Pump's managers set him up with a escort, and he was underage at the time, I believe, and this producer, agent, whatever they were, was filming him, with the escort. They were coming in and out, and, videotaping. They're creating, child porn right there. He's a minor, and it's like you think if that's what they're cool with, I mean, there's just no way he's not being exploited.
Yeah,
Yeah.
200%. There's definitely deep aspects of exploitation there. If you're doing that sort of stuff to like a quote unquote client of yours, there's definitely some shadier things that are happening that didn't make it. Like, like it just wasn't documented.
Some of these people, they're so young. Maybe not Lil Pump so much. Lil Pump didn't have as much of like a sort of a gangster image, I suppose, as like somebody like Chief Keef did. But I feel like, when they come up with that sort of image, it causes people to forget the fact that like they are in fact children. Like, Chief Keef was 16 when a lot of his stuff really started blowing up. Lil Pump too, I think, was either 16 or maybe even 15 when his stuff started blowing up. And so we want to judge them for all these decisions that they're making, and we forget that they're literally children.
I think about that. I think about that a lot. There's this book. There's a few books that I've picked up recently that like kind of like focus on that, where it's like and then there's this child psychologist that I've been looking into. She wrote this like really incredible book called Spare the Kids, but it's focused on like a corporal punishment. You know what I mean? Like physically abusing children. But she has this like really great term in the book where it's like adultism. Because you're not really like a fully formed adult. Like your brain isn't finished developing. They say like what, in 25 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Think about all the things that like a guy like Little Pump has like done to his mind. Like he's like psychologically damaged.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? And not even
Yeah.
like in a joking way. Like, you know what I mean? He's not even inched anywhere towards that line. And this guy is smoking hydroponic and like drinking, so like that sort of stuff is
Yeah.
gonna affect you for like a really long time. And like I said, it's like adultism. People look at it as like they look at it from the vantage point of an adult and not someone who's like in a state of trauma or in a state of like addiction or something as a child, and how those are all brand new experiences for you.
It's been common for a long time, grooming kids, and just like whether it's sexual or not, it's all abusive, and they grow up. I mean, I think of like all the childhood stars that I don't want to take this to like a really dark place, but it is a known fact that so many child stars do fall off, and it's like I think there's a part of our culture that like revels in that
Yeah.
somehow. I don't revel in it. It's like to me that's scary to see these kids,
Yeah,
just be broken down.
yeah. I mean, we've known it since like the 40s, 50s, and 60s with like Judy Garland.
Oh yeah.
That sort of thing. How she was abused by her mother and her agents and all that sort of thing. And yet we still have this idea of like, oh, they just can't handle that they're not famous anymore. It's like, no, they've uh, they've been horribly abused. In a way, it's the perfect crime to set these guys up and make millions off of them. People start to stop even having sympathy for them because they start to see them A, as goofballs, and B, as adults who are responsible for whatever decisions they make.
Yeah, like I was saying previously, if all this stuff had happened before the age of 25, man, you're gonna have to get therapy, man. This
Yeah.
is like deeply like we were saying before, this is like deep psychological trauma, man. You have to have someone look you over now, you know?
To go back on to kind of, your music, um, when did you said a little bit about your dad. What was like your first beginning interest in music? When was that for you? And what was some of the earliest, groups or musicians you first listened to?
Oh man, wow, that's a good question. Well, I mean, when I first got into music, because like I said, I kind of grew into the noise industrial stuff like later on. But in Southwest Ohio, where I grew up, there was like a lot of punk music, so a lot of punk, a lot of hardcore, you know what I mean? Like the local halls, pay $5, watch some bad punk band, sort of thing. I was always really influenced by that sort of stuff, and like the ethics of the punk music and like I said, DIY. I was like really fascinated by that, where it's like, oh, you can just show up with the PA and everybody just kind of, I was like, oh, I'd love to see how this stuff runs. And that was like a really big influence on me. And from that, I kind of built this affinity for uh, different styles of like, more fringe music. And that's what led me to electronic music. But um, in my house, oh man, it was like a lot of gospel music, a lot of R&B, a lot of soul. Like I said, my dad listened to a lot of like jazz fusion and that sort of stuff. So when I got into electronic, like dance music, it was more centered on that sort of stuff. So it took me a while to get into something where it's like industrial house music, techno, or that sort of. But those were like my bases in order to have like an appreciation for other genres later.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, you start listening to this stuff and then there's just this natural progression, at least it was for me, like how can I make this stuff? And then like from there it's a matter of, trying to figure out how to do it. And for me, I'm kind of spoiled, right? Because we have DAWs and all these things that weren't always a sure thing back in the day, where you can get samples. My first album, I'm not really proud of it because it wasn't very good, but I literally just took midis from GeoCities, put them into a DAW and DAW, and started putting instruments over the MIDI channels, and that was my first album. And like, but that's how you have to learn. You have to learn from these kind of crude methods, and then it's like, you come back to that music that inspired you, and you take stuff away from it in terms of how to improve.
Yeah, I wish I would have done something like that back in the day. That's actually a really smart process right there. So I got to give you shout outs on that. I never would have thought to just like go to the GeoCities page, click save as. That was like too far for me.
I understand you. Like that was kind of the same thing for me with talking and doing this whole podcast. Like I had artists that I appreciated, but yeah, you know, I was like, well, I don't know that I should contact them. I don't want to bother them. But then it's like, fast forward, and I've been doing this for over a year, and it's been frustrating at times, but yeah, it's just something that like you can't ever imagine like, wow, I was intimidated by this sort of thing. So yeah.
It's interesting. I hear that too, because yeah, I mean, well, yeah, because I run a podcast, but I've been on a big hiatus with it as of late. I just haven't gotten the I don't know. I just don't have the drive for it as late. But I feel I kind of had the same deal where it was like, oh man, I used to be so intimidated by it. Where it's just like I'm like, oh man, this just reminds me of like the first time, like you said, like I opened up Reaper, or this reminds me of the first time that I opened up a Reason. So
Yeah.
daunting. It was so daunting, this thing to look at it, and then now it's like, oh, you're like, oh, this is not as intimidating. I understand so many other facets of what's going on.
Yeah, now on the topic of your podcast and all that stuff, because like I was somebody that I'd try and listen in, but because time zone and then just other stuff, I always feel guilty like I interview a guest and then it's like we don't talk for a long time and it's not intentional. I just wind up getting busy, and it's hard to really get a community together and active. Like this Discord is almost always usually dead if we're not having a podcast, because everybody's so busy, and artists we interview have their own lives, and it's just it's a real struggle. So I definitely hear you with your podcast, but I definitely would like to see you do something like that or continue with that, because you have a very interesting life experience to be shared, and you also have a really good way of presenting topics and making things engaging instead of just making things dry and or uninteresting, or just like the Reddit front page, for example. Like, yeah, you can find politics and all that there, but there's nothing. It's just a dry circle jerk where the stuff on Donna the New Ugly is always, a lot of it's very depressing. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I can't look at it because it's just like, no, not today. But it's you make things fun and you make things entertaining through all this crazy shit that happens in the world.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you saying. Because yeah, I don't know what it is. I guess I should apply more of like the marketing. This is me again, inverted commas. Marketing things that I've learned from like making music and using social media. It's like I really like to expand the audience of the podcast. That's actually just like my main thing, trying to expand the audience. I guess we're at this point where it's like oversaturation or something with podcasts. I'm not trying to say
Yeah.
one way or the other. 'Cause I think that's total bull. There's enough ears and then there's
Sure.
enough people for
Yeah,
people
that's
to
a good
listen
point.
to it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it just seems floppy,
Yeah.
that logic. Yeah.
Yeah. And to be fair, I don't think there's necessarily like a group of people out there who are just voraciously consuming all podcasts. Podcasts are usually only popular because they appeal to a niche group of people. It's either like podcast that's about a certain topic, or it's, a couple of people who know some other people and they get guests that have to do with a certain scene. It's not like it's not like the selling point is the fact that it's a podcast and
Yeah, that's a
therefore
good point.
you shouldn't do a podcast. Like that's a ridiculous concept. It's like saying don't write books or don't make music or don't whatever because
Yeah.
there's already so many people doing it. So I agree with
Yeah.
you. It's like ridiculous logic.
Yeah. I've been trying to find that drive to get back to doing it, because I've taken like a huge break from it. It's been like months since an episode. And yeah, I wasn't sure if I needed to like change the format, but I really appreciate you saying that because it's like I enjoy doing the format where I I pick out the article, even though like I said, as you were saying before, sometimes I do pick pretty
Yeah.
depressing fucking
Yeah.
topics. I don't fucking mean. You know what I mean? Where I'm
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
compelled by it.
I know.
I can see so many cultural social gears going on at the same time. I want to talk about it,
Yeah.
but then maybe that's what it is. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's something where it's like people were like, "Oh, God damn it, Jono, not today!" Like
Yeah.
another black shooting. Like fuck, man.
Yeah, I
You
know.
pick like when's the episode or something?
Yeah.
It's not because they don't care. It's just it's like it's stuff that I can get angry about, and then I just don't wind up being productive at all. So
Yeah, that's the craziest thing I think is and I'm still working on this. It's not something I'm very good at right now, but it's something that I think we can all strive for is just like, there are always going to be horrible things happening in the world, and you have to be able to just get your headspace organized so that it's based around what you have the power to influence at that moment. Not about ignoring those problems. It's just about saying, how can I
prioritizing.
be most effective in solving the problems that are around me and everyone else right now?
Each advice there.
There's this is a bit of a tangent, but it's like I think it was Dwight D. Eisenhower, I think.
Yeah.
He basically had this system, and the idea is it's called the Eisenhower box. I'm looking it up to see if my brain just made this up or if it's a real thing. Um, yeah, and so basically you've got these four squares, um, and you have two columns, urgent and not urgent, and you have two rows, important and not important. And if it's urgent and important, if it falls into that category, then you do it right now. It's that's what's on your plate for the present moment. If it's important but not urgent, then you just don't think about it right now. Schedule it for another time. If it's not important, but it is urgent, then try to get somebody else to do it. Which is probably something that Eisenhower being the president, you have cabinet members, you can just tell them to do whatever. So perhaps that is not a reality for most of us, but it's a nice thought. And if it's not important and not urgent, then just like get it out of your head. So like I don't know. I mean, it's tough to follow a systematic way of thinking like that all the time, but it's nice to like at least keep it in the back of your mind
Sure.
that that you can approach problems in that way. And the results usually are pretty good.
We moved on to the holistic thinking portion of the episode.
That was a
Quoting
freaking
Eckhart.
that was a ridiculous tangent I went on there, but I guess the point is there's and I don't want to get into some territory where I'm starting to sound like a self-help guru or the idea of like, friggin'
Think positive, bro.
yeah, just be positive, bro. And if you just be positive,
AK.
war and famine and disease will be fucking gone, bro. If
Yeah.
you would just smile. But like
Ah!
but like
Yeah, man.
I don't know. I think there's a difference between being naively optimistic and just like, acknowledging that you can only focus on so many things at one time without like, brain overload.
And I suffer from that brain overload a lot, where it's like, yeah, trying to set up for the episodes, I'm always like trying to push myself to find something that's really interesting, and then it just like I don't know, I start chewing on the inside of my own brain, and then I end up just like not doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a really interesting and compelling episode for me and informational. I mean, I think me and Noah both learned a lot from you and about your music, and I hope our audience does as well. Before we wrap this up, is there anything that you would like to shout out? Your social media, your projects, your friends, whatever you got to shout out, hit us with it.
All right, thanks, bro. Thank you again. Thank you guys all so much for because this took a bit of wrangling to try to get me onto the show. So again, shout outs to you guys. Number one, thank you guys all so much for bringing me onto the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Social media handles, you can find me on Twitter, and Instagram at JONOMILO. And like you had mentioned before, I have a podcast. You can find the Facebook page. Twitter and Instagram at CryBabySleep. One word, CryBabySleep. And shout outs. Yeah. Again to you guys. Thank you guys so much for having me on the show. This was awesome. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no problem, man.
No problem.
All
yeah,
right.
It was good. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you guys for being part of this podcast. Thank you, audience, for listening to all this rambling. And there is knowledge hidden among the rambling here, I can tell you that. And that's going to be it. So see you next week. This has been DJ Angel Fire and 51st Citizen with our guest Jono Mi Lo. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.